that we will not turn a blind eye to their crimes. The American government has lately escalated its call for religious freedom in China. I want to take this opportunity to thank President Trump, Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, and U.S. Ambassador for Religious Freedom Sam Brownback for their recent admonishments to China regarding their continued atrocities toward Falun Gong adherents. Yesterday, President Trump met with a Falun Gong practitioner, along with other survivors of religious persecution. He stated, "Each of you has now become a witness to the importance of advancing religious liberty all around the world." During his unveiling of the State Department's annual report on global religious freedom in June, Pompeo reprimanded China for its staggering religious abuses and warned there will be consequences for governments that persecute religious believers. In his speech, he cited the plight of Falun Gong practitioners, Christians, and others. Brownback likewise called on all countries to condemn what China is doing in its war on faith and said, "There is no more important a time for the United States to promote religious freedom than now." We could not agree more. In the last 20 years that the world has allowed the CCP to get away with murder, torture, and forced organ harvesting from prisoners of conscience, the horrors have only escalated. Every year that we gather here to commemorate this anniversary, I have to ask myself, how many years is enough? Enough time for the world to shake their disbelief, to get past their shock and horror, and actually do something about it. How many years of terror and cruelty is enough? Thankfully, due to the hard work of tireless advocates in many fields, we are bringing these crucial issues to greater attention. Today's headlines are filled with news about concentration camps, testimony about forced organ harvesting, and Hong Kong and Taiwan's fight for freedom and rule of law. With so many people turning a critical eye towards China, the time is nigh for the CCP. We want to encourage everyone to continue their good work and let more people see communism for what it truly is. We call on Western governments, organizations, and individuals to support Falun Gong's freedom of belief. These atrocities are a test of our conscience. When the world is rid of this toxic ideology, we will see a period of true peace and prosperity. Today is also the day we announce the winner of our second annual Human Rights Award. Friends of Falun Gong began this tradition last year to recognize the work of groups and individuals whose work has been instrumental in peacefully resisting the persecution. This year, I am pleased to announce ETAC as our honoree. ETAC, or the International Coalition to End Transplant Abuse in China, is a charity who works internationally on ending forced organ harvesting in China. This year, they helped organize a People's Tribunal to hear testimony about the issue. For those of you unfamiliar with People's Tribunals, it is a format that provides a robust international legal analysis, but has no power to prosecute. That effort, called the China Tribunal, took place in London and concluded last month. 15 Falun Gong practitioners from all over the world traveled to the UK to share what they experienced while being imprisoned in China, including blood typing and unusual medical exams meant to determine their organs' suitability for transplant use. A couple of dozen experts A couple of dozen experts and researchers also gave their testimony. What resulted was a fairly full picture of China's transplant industry. On June 17, the tribunal concluded beyond reasonable doubt that in China, forced organ harvesting from prisoners of conscience has been practiced for a substantial period of time, involving a very substantial number of victims. Following this judgment, media attention on this issue reached unprecedented heights. In the days following the pronouncement, at least 100 reports came out from news outlets, large and small, all around the world. Many reports keep being published on the subject every day. This is the culmination of 2 decades of effort. Only by exposing the persecution will the Chinese regime see that there is no place to hide. Once the whole world says in unison that these atrocities are unacceptable, they will come to an inevitable end. So let's give a round of applause to the members of ETAC, as well as all the participants of the China Tribunal. On behalf of Friends of Falun Gong everywhere, thank you for your work. Okay, our first speaker today will be Benjamin Rogers. He's the East Asia team lead for the Christian Solidarity Worldwide. He's visiting us from the UK.
Ladies and gentlemen, good morning. It is a very great privilege to stand with you today in solidarity with Falun Gong practitioners here, across the world, and across China. My name is Ben Rogers, and I work for Christian Solidarity Worldwide, which is a human rights organization working for religious freedom for all. But I also have the privilege of serving on the advisory board of ETAC. So I am delighted that your award has been given to ETAC. I also had the privilege of being involved in the discussions with Sir Geoffrey Nice, the lawyer who chaired the China Tribunal, whom I've known and worked with for many years. And I was involved in the discussions to get the China Tribunal established. So I had no idea that you were going to announce this award to ETAC today, but I'm delighted that you have done. It is no coincidence that we gather here today to mark the 20th anniversary of the beginning of the persecution of Falun Gong, at the same time as the United States State Department has hosted this week the Ministerial to Advance Religious Freedom, the largest human rights gathering that was ever held in the State Department, and the largest, I believe, religious freedom gathering anywhere in the world. And that is very significant, because it is in all our interests to defend religious freedom for everyone, everywhere. And that must include the right of Falun Gong practitioners in China to believe and to practice their beliefs peacefully and without fear. I stand here in solidarity with Falun Gong, particularly because we must remember that across China, people of all religious beliefs are suffering the most intense crackdown probably since the Cultural Revolution. A severe crackdown against Christians, a terrible assault on the Uyghur Muslims in Xinjiang, where more than 1 million people are incarcerated in prison camps, the continuing repression in Tibet, and yes, the continuing persecution of Falun Gong. The US Ambassador at Large for Religious Freedom, Sam Brownback, has said that China is at war with faith. But he also said, it is a war they will not win. And the courage and the perseverance of Falun Gong practitioners, even here in Washington, D.C., standing in this intense heat that we have today, but standing, despite that, in solidarity with your fellow practitioners in China. But the courage and the perseverance of practitioners in China enduring severe persecution is an inspiration, and it is why I am pleased to stand with you today. I believe that the China Tribunal's findings are incredibly important. They have concluded that organ harvesting, beyond reasonable doubt, has been happening in China, and that there is no evidence to suggest that it has stopped, and that it is a crime against humanity. And so I call on governments around the world to take that report seriously and to act upon it. The report concludes with these powerful words. It says that anyone, in light of the evidence that they have found, anyone who interacts with the Chinese state, not China as a country, not China as a people, but the Chinese Communist Party state, must be aware that they are interacting and engaging with a criminal state. And that word must go out around the world. It is time to stand up to the criminal state of the Chinese Communist Party. It is time to say enough to the persecution of Falun Gong, the persecution of others, the forced organ harvesting of prisoners of conscience. I just close with these words, and I'm sorry that I can't be with you for the rest of the day. I have to go on to another engagement, but I'm with you in spirit. But I close with these words. If I had the opportunity, and I'm sure I won't because I don't think I can get into China, but if I had the opportunity to meet Xi Jinping, I would have this question for him. Why is it that you think truthfulness, compassion, and forbearance are bad things? Why is it that you persecute so brutally and so cruelly those who believe in truthfulness, compassion, and forbearance? Why is it that you have incarcerated and tortured and killed so many practitioners of Falun Gong, a peaceful, beautiful, meditative, spiritual tradition that poses no threat? But perhaps it does pose a threat, because truthfulness, compassion, and forbearance are good values, and the values of the Chinese Communist Party are based on lies, corruption, and evil. I will continue to pray for Falun Gong. I say pray, that's the phrase I use in my religious tradition, but to you I would say I will send righteous thoughts for Falun Gong practitioners in China. I stand with you today. I will go on standing with you, and the day will come when we will win this struggle for religious freedom, for Falun Gong, and for all people of China, and freedom for every citizen of China. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Our next speaker will be Gail Manchin, the Vice Chairman for the United States Commission on International Religious Freedom.
Thank you. Good morning. And it is an honor and a privilege to join you here today. I do represent the United States Commission on International Religious Freedom, or USERF, where I serve as the Vice Chair. Before I begin, I would like to extend USERF's sincere thanks to the Washington, D.C. area Falun Dafa practitioners, their association, for inviting USERF to participate in this important event. I was privileged to speak at this event last year, and it is truly an honor to join the rally here again this year. Unfortunately, as I look out on the audience, I see more pictures this year than last year. And I would ask everyone that is holding a picture of a friend or a family member, please turn and hold your picture up for everyone to see. Turn to the audience, let everyone see the people that have died in this horrible experience in China. Thank you. You are here at a very auspicious time. As you might know, the second annual Ministerial to Advance Religious Freedom is taking place this week. This entire city is energized and motivated by the common goal to create a global network of leaders and advocates dedicated to combating religious freedom violations around the world. USERF is thrilled to be a part of this organization. So USERF, for those of you not already familiar, was formed just 20 years ago. Congress passed the International Religious Freedom Act, IRFA, with the goal of making religious freedom a higher priority in United States foreign policy. The law created USERF as well as the State Department's Office of International Religious Freedom under the guidance and direction of Ambassador Sam Brownback. USERF is both independent and bipartisan, which provides us a very unique experience from which to monitor violations of freedom of religion around the world. We focus exclusively on religious freedom and do not feel pressured by the U.S. government's overall economic or security relationship with any particular country or government. Each year, USERF issues an annual report describing religious freedom conditions around the world. In it, we provide clear, actionable policy recommendations to the President, the Secretary of State, and the U.S. Congress about how to advance religious freedom through United States foreign policy. It will come as no surprise to any of you when I say the Chinese government's brutal and ongoing assault on religion and faith is precisely why religious freedom needs to remain a priority for the United States government. This Saturday, July the 20th, 2019, marks the 20th anniversary of the start of the Chinese government's campaign to eradicate Falun Gong. It will not be an occasion for celebration. 20 years of persecution is far too long for any group to have to endure. Falun Gong practitioners have endured unspeakable tragedy with grace and wisdom. Unfortunately, the Chinese government's behavior is just as appalling today as it has been for the past 2 decades. USERF condemned the crackdown in our very first annual report, which was published in 2000. Over the years, we have continued to counter the Chinese government's propaganda, which routinely calls Falun Gong and other brand religious groups, quote, evil cults, unquote. Let me make one thing clear. Falun Gong is not an evil cult. It never has been, no matter what the Chinese government propaganda machine says. Unfortunately, the situation for Falun Gong practitioners, and indeed all of the religious communities, is far, far worse today than it was 20 years ago. Since President Xi Jinping came to power, the Chinese government has intensified its crackdown on all independent religious and faith groups, and sometimes even cases of state-sanctioned individuals and groups as well. The Falun Gong, unfortunately, have been hit especially hard. USERF has heard firsthand from Falun Gong survivors and their family members about the ill treatment at the hands of Chinese authorities. According to the website Minghui, the Chinese government arrested 688 Falun Gong practitioners for their beliefs just this past April. Unfortunately, many of those detained by the government report that they are tortured or forced to renounce their faith, and of course, some of them have never been heard from again. In 2015, the Chinese government claimed it had banned the practice of forcibly harvesting organs from prisoners, including those Falun Gong that had been imprisoned for their beliefs. However, last month, an independent tribunal of experts and human rights advocates found credible evidence that the practice continues to this day. This is truly a disturbing allegation and one that we hope the U.S. government will investigate thoroughly. Because of the systematic, ongoing, and egregious persecution of Falun Gong, as well as the Chinese government's campaign against Uyghur Muslims, Tibetan Buddhists, and Christians, USERF has consistently recommended that the State Department designate China as a country of particular concern, or CPC under IRFA. The State Department has followed this recommendation every year. It has made such designations, most recently the one in 2018. Designating China as a country of particular concern is important because as a first step, IRFA requires the U.S. government to carry out concrete policy against any CPC. There are more tools available to the U.S. government than there have ever been in identifying and sanctioning specific human rights violators. Unfortunately, the U.S. government currently fulfills its requirements under IRFA by double counting sanctions it had already enacted against China for other purposes. USERF worries that this practice of double hatting undermines our efforts to promote religious freedom in China. USERF calls on the U.S. State Department to use its authority to the fullest extent to sanction Chinese officials and agencies responsible for religious freedom violations. Despite the Chinese best efforts, let me reassure you that the U.S. government and USERF has not and will never forget about Falun Gong. Your movement has friends in the halls of Congress and throughout the U.S. government, and always with USERF. As I conclude, I would like to take a moment to thank all of you, each and every one of you, for being here today and for making your voices heard. The Chinese government tries to hide its crimes from the international community, but your willingness to speak the truth has exposed those lies for the world to see. It is because of your spirit and energy that people like you, despite the current challenges, make us all ultimately hopeful about the religious freedom in China. Thank you and bless you in your efforts. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker will be Annie Boyajian, Director of Advocacy for Freedom House.
Good morning. I'm honored to join you today on behalf of Freedom House on this important and solemn occasion as we mark the 20th anniversary of the Chinese Communist Party's crackdown on Falun Gong practitioners. We are here today standing together to call on the Chinese government to end its brutal repression of those who practice. Freedom House has tracked worsening repression by the Chinese government targeting a variety of actors, not just religious believers, but also lawyers, political dissidents, labor leaders, grassroots activists, and even regular internet users. In 2017, we also did a standalone report specifically on worsening repression in China of religious believers, including a detailed examination of Falun Gong practitioners. The story of the persecution of Falun Gong practitioners is not an easy one to tell or to hear. Extortion, disappearance, prison labor, torture, death. Everyone here today knows that story all too well. Available evidence suggests that forced extraction of organs from Falun Gong detainees for sale and transplant operations has occurred on a large scale and may be continuing. Many of the tactics of repression used by the Chinese government on others, including the more than 1 million Uyghurs in detention camps at this very moment, were first practiced and perfected on Falun Gong practitioners. But the story of Falun Gong is not without hope. Despite tightening controls, millions of religious believers of all faiths in China defy official restrictions in daily life or engage in some form of direct protest, at times scoring significant victories. Falun Gong believers in China have responded to CCP persecution with tenacity, nonviolence, and creativity. Practitioners inside and outside China have made a concerted effort to directly communicate with security agents and judges in China by phone and in person, urging police not to arrest local Falun Gong residents and appealing to their consciences. Gradually, these efforts appear to be bearing fruit. There are well-documented cases of detainees who were released after such targeted rescue campaigns. Facing the world's most sophisticated censorship and surveillance system, Falun Gong practitioners have proven particularly adept at not only developing new workarounds to preserve access to information, free speech, and data privacy, but also at disseminating them at the grassroots level. Practitioners have also worked to link the persecution of Falun Gong to China's broader problems, explaining the persecution campaign's impact on social morality, or linking it to hot-button topics like corruption, police brutality, and tainted goods. These wins are heartening and give energy to the work we here in Washington need to do. Freedom House was pleased to see the president met with a Falun Gong torture survivor whose husband is detained, and with other family members of religious prisoners in China and elsewhere. But more should be done. The US government should impose global Magnitsky sanctions on Chinese officials involved in repression and human rights abuses in China, including those persecuting Falun Gong practitioners. And as my colleague from USURF mentioned, the United States should impose stricter penalties for China under the International Religious Freedom Act. Members of Congress should advocate for individual prisoners of conscience, calling for the release of all those wrongly detained in China, and all US government officials should raise issues of human rights and repression, including the release of prisoners and Falun Gong practitioners, in every meeting with Chinese officials at every level. Even on a day like today, which is hard and somber and sad in many ways, we can cling to the hope and the bravery of all those who push back against repression in China. As Falun Gong practitioners continue to win small victories day in and day out throughout China, we look forward to the day when practitioners and believers of all faiths can practice freely and openly in the world's most populous country. Thank you.
Our next speaker will be Dr. Linda Langeman, Commissioner for the Citizens Commission on Human Rights.
Thank you. It's an honor to stand with you here in support of Falun Gong and to join with so many others on the right side of history to vehemently condemn the persecution of Falun Gong practitioners in China. Citizens Commission on Human Rights is an international organization that was founded 50 years ago. It's a nonprofit, non-political mental health watchdog and human rights group. Political psychiatric abuse has a long international history, but today our attention is on the persecution of Falun Gong in China. 20 years ago, a campaign of persecution was launched against innocent people practicing Falun Gong in China. This campaign includes psychological tools of misinformation and propaganda, imprisonment in labor camps, incarceration in psychiatric custodial facilities, psychological coercion and forced psychiatric drugs to make people recant Falun Gong, forced organ harvesting, psychological and physical torture, and killing. These unconscionable atrocities could not occur without the intimate participation of psychiatry. Immediate action and accountability is needed. The traditional spiritual practice of meditative exercises and the moral philosophy of Falun Gong are simple practices that helps one's spiritual, mental, and physical health. While Falun Gong is not in the practice of treating mental illness or depression, its practices of exercise and meditation are recognized as workable alternatives to dangerous psychiatric drugs. In the 1990s, between 70 million and 100 million people in China practiced Falun Gong. On 20 July 1999, the campaign to eradicate Falun Gong was initiated. The tactics of the campaign, including calling Falun Gong a cult, were done to create fear and avoidance of a practice that improved physical and mental well-being. Since Falun Gong was banned in China, sales of antidepressant drugs there increased 138% in just a 4-year period. There has been a tremendous increase in sales of all major psychiatric drugs in China since the banning of Falun Gong. It's clear that the psychiatric pharmaceutical industry has a vested interest in driving out any alternative workable help, such as Falun Gong. The independent tribunal in London released its final judgment. Citizens Commission on Human Rights calls for the International Criminal Court to intervene in the unconscionable human rights atrocities being committed against Falun Gong practitioners. We also call on the World Psychiatric Association to stand with Congress, other legislatures, and the United Nations on behalf of Falun Gong and break from its appalling record of failing to address and discipline its members' roles in these crimes. We've come together here to demand an end to the persecution of Falun Gong. This is my 3rd year speaking, and hopefully the next time we gather, it will be to celebrate the end of the persecution. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker will be Susan Schulte, President of the Defense Forum Foundation.
Thank you to all of you who have gathered here today. Thank you to Dr. Lily Zhang for your courage, steadfastness. I'm honored to be your friend and colleague, and I want to recognize her and all the people that have organized this rally once again. I'm glad to be here today, but I'm deeply saddened that this event has to be held again this year because of the Chinese Communist Party's unprovoked and violent continuing campaign of terror against the Falun Gong that first started in 1999. You have been on the front lines of the fight to end persecution and human rights violations in China. This fight is not of your choosing, but simply because of the CCP's unprovoked attack against you. It has taken far too long for our government and the international community to respond to the gross violations of human rights the CCP is committing against the Falun Gong every day, and all who suffer under the tyranny of the CCP, whether Tibetans, Uyghurs, democracy advocates, trade union activists, journalists, Christians, Muslims, Buddhists, any Chinese citizens who dares to speak out against Xi Jinping and his brutal dictatorship, and any mother who has a second child in her womb, all experience the gross violations of human rights by the Chinese communist dictatorship. We're grateful to heroes like David Matis, David Kilgore, and Ethan Gutman, who documented the horrors happening in the hospitals of China, where 100,000 organs were harvested, leading to the mass killing of many Falun Gong practitioners. I want to strongly encourage you to never, never, never give up until your God-given human rights are respected. Our governments are finally waking up to this. Many of you know that I've been very active with North Korea human rights movement, and when we brought the first survivors of the political prisoner camps in 1999 to the Congress, people didn't believe their stories. It took decades. Never give up. I want to leave you with a verse that has helped me greatly in my human rights work. It's from Psalm 94, verse 16 through 19. It states, "Who will rise up for me against the wicked? Who will take a stand for me against evildoers? Unless the Lord had given me help, I would soon have dwelt in the silence of death. When I said, 'My foot is slipping,' your love, O Lord, supported me. When anxiety was great within me, your consolation brought joy to my soul." This verse is a promise by the God that created us that when you rise up against evil, when you refuse to be silenced when you see evil, God promises he will be there to support you. He will console you and he will bring you joy. So please be relentless in your work and never give up until the people of China, all the people of China, and all Falun Gong practitioners can enjoy their God-given human rights. I will stand with you till we see that day. God bless you and thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker will be Didi Laugerson, Executive Director for Save the Persecuted Christians.
Hello, my friends. Thank you. I am very humbled to stand here before you today and to welcome you to the West Lawn of the Capitol in Washington, D.C. Like you, I am an ordinary citizen. I am mom to 6 boys, and I come from the heart of America, Colorado. And I've been lifted up to have a platform to speak for persecuted people. Save the Persecuted Christians is a large and growing coalition of NGO and faith leaders who are concerned about the persecution of Christians in the world, but that is without prejudice to the world's 80% of the population that is suffering persecution and discrimination and oppression for their religious freedom beliefs. I stand before you as an American, and as I said, a mom who is concerned for people such as yourselves, whose family members, whose friends, whose colleagues have been so brutally harmed by the Communist Party of China. And I want to assure you that you are in our prayers and in our work. We stand together united as individuals pushing back against evil regimes that seek to quiet the voice. We stand with you for honesty, for compassion, for forbearance. These are the tenets of the Falun Gong, and they are ours as well. And so we stand today in solidarity with you. I'm pleased to say that with Dr. Lily Zhang, the Falun Dafa, we have signed a multi-faith letter demanding that enablers of persecution here in the United States, American law firms that lobby on behalf of persecutors such as China, are called out and asked to drop their lobbying efforts on behalf of these regimes, that they may not be legitimated and that they may not be given special treatment here in the United States. Specifically, Squire Patton Boggs, one of the most prominent law firms in the United States of America, lobbies on behalf of the Chinese regime. So I thank the Falun Dafa for their participation with us in this call, and I let you know that not only are we this coalition that is large and growing across America, but we are also the grassroots of America. Individual people like you and me with a voice in your peaceful dissent are powerful when we come together and unite our voices. And I know that the work that you are doing is sometimes tiring and seems impossible against something so big as the Chinese Communist Party and this evil regime. But I encourage you today to continue doing what you are doing, to call them out and to shine light on their evil misdeeds and their crimes against humanity. I thank you for having me here today. You are in my heart, and I really do hope and pray that next year when we come together, it will be to celebrate the end of the persecution. I just came from an event, the Committee on the Present Danger China, which is a newly organized group of leaders looking to shine a light on what this regime is doing to spread its propaganda worldwide. And so I encourage you to go to presentdangerchina.org and watch the threat briefings that are available there, so that you know that we really are standing with you and we have your cause at the forefront of all the work that we are doing. God bless you and stay strong. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker will be Faith McDonald, Director for Religious Liberty Programs at the Institute on Religion and Democracy.
Good morning. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you for all that you do, all your faithful work, your faithful witness of what it means to be a peaceful protester, to be someone who stands for truth, compassion, and forbearance in the midst of great evil. This week, not only is it, we're celebrating or observing the 20 years of persecution of Falun Gong in China, but this week there was an event called the State Department Ministerial on the advance of religious freedom around the world. And you have been doing that. You have been fighting for the advance of religious freedom for 20 years. I mean, I've been coming and speaking to you all for almost 20 years. I'm not sure how many. I think I missed a couple when I was on vacation. But I am just incredibly blessed and inspired by you all, by the ability that you have to stand firm in the midst of what has been going on, and to show the truth before the truth came out as evidence, which we now know in terms of the harvesting of organs. Now no one can deny it because of the report, the China report that came out that gives just undeniable evidence of the harvesting of people, or the harvesting of people's organs while they are alive. The evil that the Chinese Communist government has perpetrated against Falun Gong and continues to perpetrate against so many people in China. We called this an event that is against the persecution of religion. I was just at an event this morning that was talking about religiously motivated violence. But you know, in China, I think we have like the opposite. We have not religiously motivated violence against people of religion. We have violence motivated because you even have a religion, because you have a belief, because you have a faith. The people who have no belief, who are the communist government, are perpetrating violence against you. And you know, the truth is, that's their religion. Their religion is power. Their religion is control. But you are standing for truth, justice, and forbearance, and you can stand against the non-religion of the communist government. In fact, I know a couple of years ago, the online denouncement of communism by people in China was up to 300 million. I'm sure it's way beyond that now, I'm not sure, but thank you so much for that, because it's because of you and because of your truth and your standing for truth that has even happened, that there have been people courageous enough to give up communism online like that. And you're also helping others who are not part of Falun Gong. I'm a Christian, and Christians in China are being persecuted. You're standing with them when you stand for truth. You're standing for the Uyghurs who are being put in concentration camps in East Turkestan. You're standing for the North Korean refugees who are being pushed back to their own country by China to face certain death in North Korea. And you're standing, you know what? You're standing now for people of Africa, because China, the Chinese government, is trying to swallow Africa. The Chinese government is trying to take over Africa bit by bit. You know about the Belt and Road Initiative. This is another form of control and power of this communist government that uses that kind of power in Africa as a way of perpetuating their own religion, their religion of power and money and control. So thank you so much for standing for that, for standing in the hot sun, for being willing to be witnesses of truth when people were mocking the idea that there was organ harvesting going on and that things were as bad as you said they were. Thank you, because now, you know, if you were not so tolerant and forbearant and patient, you could say to them, I told you so. But I know, but just by standing here and by being the faithful witnesses you are, that is what you're doing. You are vindication to everything that has gone on before. And, you know, we will see vindication, I believe, in our lifetime in China, but there's also a day coming when there will be perfect vindication. As a Christian, I believe what it says in the book of Revelation, that there is a day coming when God will wipe away every tear from our eyes, and there will be no more crying and no more sorrow, and the Lamb will be the light at the center of us all. So thank you very much. God bless you, and I'm so happy to be here with you again.
Thank you. Our next speaker will be Congressman Steve Chabot of the Ohio's 12th District.
Good afternoon and welcome to Washington, everybody. I'm Steve Chabot. I'm from Cincinnati, Ohio, and I'm proud to be here with my good friend, Sunny Liu, who's a university professor at the University of Cincinnati and a proud Falun Gong practitioner herself. Sunny, why don't you come up so people can see you there? Right back here. Sunny Lu. And she and I and all of you demand an end to the 20 years of horrible persecution of Falun Gong practitioners by the Chinese Communist Party. And we see around here some of the signs here, the violent suppression of 100 million people back there, 20 years of persecution of the Falun Gong in China, torture, killing, organ harvesting. It's horrific. And enough is enough. 20 years ago, on Saturday, the CCP began their brutal crackdown. At that time, there were more Falun Gong practitioners than party members. Here in Congress, and I'm a member of the United States Congress in the House, right back here behind us, I've spent a lot of time working to strengthen human rights throughout Asia. And I've also been a longtime supporter of the Falun Gong and your right to practice in China or anywhere else for that matter. The Chinese Communist Party is truly barbaric. Wrongful imprisonment, so-called re-education, brainwashing really, torture, and forced organ harvesting and murder are the tools that they use to stifle the Falun Gong movement. Now they're doing the same thing to the Uyghurs. Such tactics have no place in a civilized society, yet they are commonplace in communist China. No government, much less the Chinese Communist Party, has the right to deny anyone freedom of religion. And as long as I'm still in Congress, I and many of my colleagues, both Republicans and Democrats, will fight for your right to practice freely in China or in the United States or anywhere else. God bless you all. God bless your families. God bless the Falun Gong. And God bless the United States of America. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Our next speaker will be Wendy Wright, President of the Christian Freedom International.
Thank you. It's really an honor to stand with you today. I've spoken many times in the past at these gatherings, and I'm so sorry to be with you again. I wish that we would never have to do this again. If I were to be kidnapped off of this stage, driven to a hospital, had my organs ripped out of me to be donated to somebody else, every person who was involved in that would be held accountable. The driver of the car, the institution of the hospital, the doctors who were involved, everyone would be an accomplice to that crime against humanity. That's what we need to do with those that are involved in the organ harvesting of the Falun Gong and the other political prisoners in China. The patients who are coming to get these new organs are coming from other countries. That means that there are travel agents involved, medical tourism, brokers. There's a whole network. They need to be held accountable. The doctors who are involved, the hospitals that are involved, each one of them are criminals. The hotels that the patients may be staying at, if they are part of a hotel chain, they should be held accountable as well. The State Department should be putting out warnings to everyone who travels to China that they should not be taking part in anything that has to do with organ harvesting. There should be posters and PSAs just like there are against human trafficking in airports, in hotels, in restrooms. There should be warnings everywhere along the pathway into China that this is criminal behavior and anyone who's involved in it will be held accountable. Medical professionals in the United States, when they have a patient they've been treating for quite a while, all of a sudden shows up with a new organ, they should be whistleblowers and they should help to track down who was involved in making that happen. We need to stigmatize. We need to criminalize organ theft. We need to hold everyone involved in this accountable. It's only as people see that there's a penalty in the price, that they will realize that this is not acceptable. I stand with you against the persecution that you are suffering. Christian Freedom International helps persecuted Christians, and we know as Christians are being rounded up in China right now, they may be next in line. What's happened to the Falun Gong will happen to the Christians as well. And we need to, as Proverbs 24:11 says, rescue those who are unjustly sentenced to death. Don't stand back as they are being led to the slaughter. God bless you as you are standing on behalf of others, as you are being a voice for others, and may God bless this movement and protect his children.
Thank you. Our next speaker is David Kilgour, former Canadian Secretary of State for the Asia Pacific, former Member of Parliament, and Nobel Peace Prize nominee.
Thank you, Ellen, very much. Dear friends of Falun Gong, apparently there are more than 2,000 of us here today on a hot Thursday. That's incredible. Thank you all for coming from wherever you came today to stand in the burning sun. A lot of you have got hats, so please forgive me for wearing a hat too. I want to congratulate President Trump for meeting yesterday with Falun Gong, Uyghurs, Tibetans, and Christians in the Oval Office in the White House. I think that was a very, very good thing to do, and I salute him for it. 20 years ago, as I'm sure all of you know, the party state in Beijing launched a brutal campaign to eradicate Falun Gong. People everywhere should condemn the ongoing torture, killing, organ pillaging, and demand the release of all Falun Gong and other prisoners of conscience. Since seizing power in 1949, as all of you know, the party state has persecuted minorities mercilessly, instilling terror among the people of China. The Uyghur Muslim community in Xinjiang is now victimized. Uyghurs entering so-called re-education camps are reportedly blood tested for organ transplant purposes. One credible escapee reported that those given orange armbands at the test simply disappeared. World leaders must speak up. It cannot be business as usual with a regime that treats its minorities or anyone so appallingly. Recently, a highly respected Canadian Rabbi, Dr. Reuven Bulka, wrote in the Ottawa Citizen, and I quote, "First they denied, then they said they would stop it. However, they never did. The murderous practice continues unchecked. Chinese authorities loudly denied that they were harvesting organs from political prisoners, mainly the Falun Gong, to sell on open market to people in need of organs." Quote, he goes on, "This is brutal murder, taking the freshest and best organs from the bodies of live people. Despite irrefutable evidence this was happening, the Chinese authorities denied it. Then, in 2014, the Chinese authorities announced they would soon stop this practice of taking organs and executing prisoners, thereby revealing that they are both liars and murderers." He goes on, "It is mind-boggling to think that the civilized world applauded rather than calling out the Chinese government and demanding they stop murders immediately rather than eventually. Now we learn that the Chinese authorities are still at it. Consider the statement of Sir Geoffrey Nice, QC, chair of the China Tribunal in London, tasked with investigating Chinese organ harvesting practices. And I quote, this is what Sir Geoffrey said. In fact, I was in London when he said it a couple of weeks ago. Quote, The conclusion shows that very many people have died indescribably hideous deaths for no reason, that more may suffer, and that all who live on the planet where extreme wickedness may now be found in the power of those running one of the oldest civilizations known to humankind, of course, China. The facts are clear. 90,000 transplants a year, a short waiting time, and the assurance of a backup organ should the original organ fail is an amazing combination, resulting from the murders of readily available prisoners. Primarily Falun Gong, but including Tibetans, Uyghur Muslims, and Christian sects. And then, this is the final thing that Rabbi Bulka said, quote, "Governments must hold the Chinese government accountable. Canada and the US should join those countries banning travel to China, as we just heard, I was so happy to hear, for transplant surgery. And any deal with China must include an insistence that this barbaric practice stop immediately, coupled with a mechanism whereby such stoppage is verifiable." When buying Chinese products, ladies and gentlemen, Rabbi Bulka said, we should ask ourselves if we are unintentionally supporting murder. Refusing to buy made-in-China products sends a loud message and is a profound manifestation of caring, close quote. That's what Rabbi Reuven Bulka wrote last week in the Ottawa Citizen in Ottawa. Now, a bit more. In 2006, I know you're all roasting, but I'll be as brief as I can. The Coalition to Investigate the Persecution of Falun Gong, represented here today, asked David Matus and me as volunteers to investigate. We released 2 books, 2 reports, and a book, Bloody Harvest, and we've continued to investigate. You can get our revised report in 18 languages on the website. We determined that for 41,500 transplants done between 2000 and 2005 in China, the sourcing was beyond any reasonable or other doubt Falun Gong prisoners of conscience. Ethan Gutman's 2014 book, The Slaughter, estimates that the organs of 65,000 Falun Gong and, quote, 2,000 to 4,000 Uyghurs, Tibetans, and Christians were harvested from 2000 to 2008. Our 2016 update, as I'm sure most of you know, is available online. David Matus and I visited about a dozen countries to interview Falun Gong practitioners who had escaped from both the camps and China. Inmates of forced labor camps made a range of export products as subcontractors to multinational companies, including Christmas decorations, and we were also told they were making toys, children's toys for McDonald's restaurants. Can you imagine? This gross corporate irresponsibility and violation of WTO rules calls for an effective response by all trading partners of China, including, of course, the United States and Canada. Now, in the decades of the Soviet Union, mental health professionals globally faced the abuse of psychiatry there against prisoners of conscience and acted strongly against it, helping to have the Soviet-era practices changed. Today, transplant professionals globally face the abuse of transplant surgery, and President for Life Xi's China, but their response has been mostly disappointing, I'm sorry to say. Some have read the research and realized that what is going on in China with transplantations is a mass killing of innocents and cover-up. They accordingly distance themselves from the Chinese transplant profession and encourage others to do likewise. The Chinese Party state has no credible factual answers to the work of independent researchers who have demonstrated the mass killings of innocents for transplantation. Indeed, given the massive scale of transplantation business in China, it's impossible to deny the research in any credible manner. The party publicizes and exaggerates the endorsements of transplant professionals in democracies, including this one, ladies and gentlemen, and Canada, who have fallen for their propaganda. A willingness to confront the truth about China is needed in the transplantation profession before many more innocents are killed for their organs. You can get, and I'm speaking on behalf of the International Coalition to End Transplant Abuse in China today. You can access their website easily if you go to Google and just put the International Coalition to End Transplant Abuse. All of you would be welcome to join us as volunteers, researchers, or whatever appeals to you. There's an easy form to fill out. Now, finally, I'm sorry I've gone on so long. Former counselor at the Canadian Embassy in Beijing and professor of political science Charles Burton writes, quote, I'm sure you'll all agree with this, politely urging Beijing to grant visas to our agricultural specialists to show that Canada's canola seeds are not contaminated, as they falsely claim, will not get us anywhere. You know that 2 Canadians are in prison with their lights on 24 hours a day, and I hope you all know why that happened. Because we did our duty under an extradition treaty to this country and arrested Miss Bung of the Huawei company. Now, quote, he also said this, and I think you'll all agree with it. Quote, China succeeds in its existential threat to pluralistic, democratic, and free-thinking societies because we've been blinded by greed and have looked away for more than 25 years as communist authorities ignored international norms for human rights and fair trade. Currently, there is no coherent multinational strategy against Chinese influence operations. The less we respond to it in any substantive way, the more China is emboldened its practice of global disruption, close quote. That's true for Canada, I think it's true for the United States, and it's true for a lot of democracies. And we all have to change the thinking of our business communities, of a lot of our intellectuals and professions and diplomats. So in conclusion, what is most needed immediately from Washington, Ottawa, and other capitals is a stronger political will and much more sophistication, exerting universal values, and we all know what those are, with Beijing on all issues, but most of all on the terrible issue of organ pillaging. Thank you.
Our next speaker will be Rong Yi, president of the Tweedang Center.
Good afternoon, my friends, distinguished guests. Today, I'm very honored to speak on behalf of the Global Service Center for Quitting the Chinese Communist Party, the Tweedang Center, to share with you the great news that over 337 million Chinese people have withdrawn from the Chinese Communist Party and its affiliated organizations. Congratulations to the brave Chinese for their choice for freedom and bright future. The Tweedang movement started from the inspiration of the publication of Non-Commentary on Communist Party in 2004. This book exposed for the first time the true history and the evil nature of the Chinese Communist Party. It's a historic movement of spiritual awakening and returning to conscience for the Chinese people. The daily registration number of people who quit CCP is about 100,000. which shows the common desire for Chinese people from all walks of life, including government officials, policemen, diplomats, students, workers, and farmers, etc., for freedom and social justice, and the choice of non-violence and non-cooperation to the Chinese Communist regime. At the widespread of the truth, more of the Chinese people turn to quit the evil party. It is the brightest road for Chinese nation and the world to peacefully disintegrate the evil force of the Chinese Communist regime, the largest communist totalitarian state in the world, which has brought a deep disaster to China and has a serious impact on the world civilization. The Tweedong movement has set a spiritual model and a moral example for all Chinese to safely and peacefully withdraw from the CCP dictatorship. It's the greatest tolerance, the greatest kindness in resolving, transforming, correcting, changing the most fundamental problems in China today. As we can see, Tweedong movement has brought about the fundamental social changes in China today. Almost all CCP officers know that Chinese communist regime is collapsing. So they have been sending their families and the money to abroad. Ordinary Chinese people are protesting for the basic human rights and fighting to get rid of the regime. The Chinese Communist Party is being swept away by Chinese people's choice. I would like to take this opportunity to call for support for the Tweedong movement from the international community for more support to Chinese people's choice for freedom. It's time to end the CCP's 20 years brutal persecution of Falun Gong practitioners. It's time to end the persecution of CCP to all Chinese people. It's time to end the largest communist regime in the world. So let's work together for a better world without the Chinese communist regime. Thank you very much. 谢谢大家。
Our next speaker is Youchen Wang.
Tear down this wall, the Chinese Communist regime. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. On July 20, 1999, former Chinese Communist Party leader Jiang Zemin, out of self-motive, initiated a large-scale campaign to persecute Falun Gong practitioners who follow the principles of truthfulness, compassion, and tolerance. Jiang believed that with the party's several million person military and abundant monetary reserves, as well as the decades of experience in persecuting China's citizens, the CCP would be able to eradicate Falun Gong in a very short time. However, 20 years later, instead of being eradicated, Falun Gong has spread to 110 nations and regions all over the world. 转法轮, the main book of Falun Gong teachings, have been translated into 41 languages and is published and distributed worldwide outside China. In the 5,000 years of Chinese culture, Zhuang Falun has been translated more than any other Chinese book. The founder of Falun Gong, Mr. Li Fengzi, receives respect from people of all walks of life, nations, political parties, races, language, and culture, for his outstanding contribution to people's physical and spiritual health. In contrast, Jiang Zemin has made himself the most notorious scum in the world for being the main perpetrator of the persecution of Falun Gong. More than 210,000 Falun Gong practitioners have sued Jiang Zemin in China's Supreme People's Court and the Supreme People's Procuratorate. Jiang has now been tried in the moral court by people of conscience condemning his evilness. What awaits him is undoubtedly the most mind-boggling grand trial in human history. Another consequence of Jiang Zemin's persecution of Falun Gong is that the CCP will soon meet its own demise, which is to be seen in the following aspects. First, the CCP has become the most corrupt political party in the world. In order to obtain support from communist officials to sustain the persecution of Falun Gong, Jiang Zemin intentionally allowed the officials to become corrupt. In today's China, corruption is a widespread phenomenon among communist officials of all levels. According to the public data we have collected, since January 2013, more than 418 high-ranking officials of the provincial or minister level and above have been found guilty of corruption, and at least 57 officials have embezzled or taken bribes exceeding 100 million yuan. Second, the CCP has become the worst traitorous party in the world. The land that Jiang Zemin surrendered to Russia and other countries is larger than 14 times the size of Taiwan Island. Third, the CCP has become the party with the bloodiest deaths in the world. During its 17-year rule, the CCP has killed more than 18 million Chinese. In the past 20 years, the large-scale naval harvesting of organs from Falun Gong practitioners constitutes a new form of horrific crime, which is described by right activities as an unprecedented evil on this planet. Fourth, the CCP has become the world's most evil party in terms of destroying traditional culture. Since the CCP seized the power by overthrowing the Republic of China, the 5,000 years splendid Chinese traditional culture suffered devastating catastrophe. The CCP's destruction of cultural legacy left by our ancestors surpassed any natural disaster in history. Its ultimate goal is to turn descendants in the divine land of China into Marxists who follow dishonesty, weakness, violence, and commit all kinds of outrage and harm and abroad, which in turn will destroy the entire Chinese nation. Fifth, the CCP has become the largest state terrorist party in the world. According to a report by United Daily News, a pro-Beijing publication, the Chinese Communist regime has installed 600 million surveillance cameras across the country. Market intelligence firm IDC released a report predicting that by 2022, the Chinese authority will have installed up to 76 billion surveillance cameras, turning the entire nation of China into a huge prison. In 2019, the party's stability maintenance expedition was 1,387.9 billion yuan, which surpassed the military spending. All Chinese who recognize universal values and the traditional values are considered an enemy of the CCP. Some civilians suddenly disappeared. Some were forced to plead guilty to crimes they did not commit. Some allegedly committed suicide. Some suffer severe torture, and some become victims of nerve organ harvesting. The CCP has created countless legal cases involving unjust force innoise charges, and is still creating new wrongful charges every day. 6. The CCP has become the evil force that aims to destroy all mankind. Since the CCP launched the persecution of Falun Gong in 1999, it has spread lies and rumors about Falun Gong to the whole world, poisoning people in our country. In addition, since the CCP joined the WTO in 2001, it has spread the ideology, dishonesty, weakness, and violence to the rest of the world. Domestically, in persecuting Falun Gong, Jiang Zemin has committed crimes of genocide, torture, and crimes against humanity. Internationally, by giving away a large area of China's territory to other countries, he has endangered homeland security. Jiang is the root cause of major problems in China's domestic politics and international diplomacy. If this scourge is not removed, peace cannot be restored in China. Today, in 2019, the CCP has found itself in deep crisis, both at home and abroad. The CCP completely relies on violence and deception to maintain its power. As Chinese people describe it, from top to bottom, the superior suppresses the subordinate, all the way to the farmers. From bottom to top, the subordinate deceives superior, all the way to the party chairman. The CCP is like a wreck, ready to withhold. Its privileged officials are preparing for sinking of the ship by sending their family abroad and transferring their assets outside the country. In November 2004, Epoch Times published an editorial series, The Nine Commentary on Communist Party, which exposed the evil nature of the CCP that exists in defiance of heaven, earth, nature, and humanity. The nine commentaries sparked a great tide of people quitting the CCP, a spiritual awakening movement. According to statistics from the Epoch Times quitting the CCP platform, to date, 330 million Chinese have withdrawn from the CCP and its affiliated organizations, the Young League and the Young Pioneers. On June 16, 2019, 2 million Hong Kong residents took to the street to protest a proposed extradition bill, the largest protest in Hong Kong's history. On the surface, Hong Kong people are protesting the extradition bill. In essence, they are telling the whole world in the loudest voice, we do not trust CCP. History has progressed to the day of reckoning, the day to bring Jiang Zemin and the CCP to justice. In the past 7+ years, after Chongqing former police chief Wang Lijun fled to the U.S. consulate in Chengdu On February 6, 2012, the CCP's evil forces, led by Jiang, has been seriously weakened. The evildoers who persecute Falun Gong had met with karmic retribution on a large scale. In this great historical moment, when all kinds of signs indicate that CCP is about to die, and the Chinese people long for a change, I, in front of the Capitol in Washington, D.C., strongly urging Chinese President Xi Jinping to follow the will of heaven and of the people, arrest Jiang Zemin immediately, and disintegrate the CCP. China has been called the divine land since ancient times. In history, every great leader who believed in God was able to receive blessing from God. Today, if any Chinese top official were to take the lead in standing up and abandoning communism in China, he would be helped by God and accomplish one of the most glorious feats in history. I hope that Chinese leaders will eventually choose to stand on the right side in this unprecedented battle in human history between justice and evil. Thank you.
Chinese authorities were harvesting organs from prisoners, but they were killing them when they were alive and taking their organs, and guaranteeing people when they would come that if the organ failed, they would have a backup in a few weeks. We know from the way organ donation works and getting organs from people who are generous enough to donate, the world doesn't work that way. This only can be possible if you have a whole bank of people that you're ready to kill in order to provide organs. And the report that came out from England was exactly the same and talked about the brutality and the atrocity that is going on. And sadly enough, it wasn't even reported in the Western press. You know, they say to me, well, my not buying something made in China is not going to make a difference. And I say to them, you're right. But if everybody thinks that way, then nothing is going to help. But if everybody thinks that my little bit might make a difference, maybe they will get the message.
It's important that people around the world use this moment to remember all the victims, and we need to speak their names, we need to tell their stories, and we need to make it clear that we're not going to ignore or forget what's gone on.
Persecution, it's not something to be celebrated. What is to be celebrated is the perseverance and the strength of the Falun Gong community. It's because of them that we all gather in support. We've been by their side for these 20 years, and for however much longer it takes, we will be right there by their side. Fight as long as the fight needs fighting.
To Falun Gong practitioners, I want to say, firstly, that I'm in solidarity with you. Falun Gong has been severely persecuted in the most horrific way, and I deeply admire Falun Gong practitioners' resilience and peaceful spiritual practice. And I will continue to work for the day when all people in China can practice their beliefs, whether that's Falun Gong or Christianity or Islam or Buddhism or any other belief in China, can do so freely and openly and safely.
In China, the blood testing and organ examination is for transplants. I mean, it's not for their health because they're being victimized, tortured, and treated badly in other ways. I'm convinced if the killing of Falun Gong for their organs had stopped when it started or when our report came out, the Uyghurs today would not be killed for their organs. I mean, they still may have been arbitrarily detained because of this fantasy of terrorism, but they wouldn't be killed for their organs. And I mean, one should take a lesson from that. It didn't stop at Falun Gong. It went to the Uyghurs, but it's not going to stop at the Uyghurs either if we let it go. It's going to continue to spread, and the spreading from Falun Gong to the Uyghurs should be a lesson to all of us that we have got to do a lot more to stop this than we have done.
1999年之后，我们之所以站出来告诉世人真相呢，是因为在中国呢，中共撒了非常多的弥天大谎，所以我们觉得这也是我们的责任吧，应该告诉全中国的人，告诉全世界的人，法轮功到底是什么？中共撒了这么多的谎，到底为了什么？那我们非常欣慰的看到，就是这么多年来呢，其实也越来越多在中国大陆的民众和全世界的民众呢，在明白这个法轮功的真相，也在站出来抵制和抗议这场迫害吧。但是非常遗憾的是，到今天为止20年过去了，中共对法轮功的迫害还没有停止吧。那所以只要这个迫害一天没有停止，我们法轮功学员反迫害、讲真相的这个和平的行动就一直不会停止。
Well, the interesting thing is that in the 1980s, there various Chinese Communist Party officials were actually participating in the Falun Gong and were advocating that the Falun Gong was a great way to achieve harmony and to achieve the Chinese Communist Party's ideal of a harmonious coexistence in the country. And then once they appeared as a demonstration outside of Zhuhai in Beijing, as a show of solidarity and of making their voices heard using what we would call First Amendment rights, or just the basic human right of self-expression, then at that point they were declared as a political ploy of one of the internal members of the Chinese Communist Party. They were declared a terrorist threat and then have been persecuted since. The number of organ sales going on from China in proportion to the Falun Gong persecution, it's the world's most documented example of organ harvesting, and we can't participate in it, and it shows the evils of the Chinese Communist Party and the need to stand against it now.
People who are only in prison because they happen to be exercising their spiritual belief. So they're prisoners, but they're only in there because of their own consciences. So they're not criminals. But what we are seeing is the practice of organ harvesting is being carried out. The evidence is suggesting that it's being carried out on these prisoners, these innocent people, without their consent and under conditions that are not monitored, not transparent. They possibly don't even have the normal standards of medical care with anaesthetics and follow-up care and all those sorts of things. In fact, the evidence suggests that they are being examined prior to it, purely for organ health, not for systemic health, that they are being shot in the body through one side of their body, and that the organs are being removed possibly even without proper anaesthetic and certainly without consent, and that they are then left to die. Now, if that is what is taking place, that constitutes a crime against humanity. There's no getting around that. The Falun Gong followers are just people who happen to believe a certain peaceful spiritual belief system. However, they have been rounded up and put in prison as though they are common criminals, which they're not.
Freedom is so precious and it's so fragile that unless we preserve any aspect of that freedom, including Falun Gong, Falun Dafa, then we are allowing dictators to tell us how to think, what to think, and when to think. And that's not just not acceptable. And I think that for Falun Gong, Falun Dafa, and their representatives in Canada and beyond, they are starving for the same thing that anybody else. Peace and freedom. And at least in Canada, they can do this freely without any fear of persecution. And this obviously touches the subject of freedom in general. So the one thing that I can predict, Lucy, is that within the next 10 years, and I sincerely believe that, China will no longer be communist. Communism will collapse in China.
En annan grupp som systematiskt har förföljts är ju då Falun Gong, som vi hörde om tidigare, som har förföljts, trakasserats och fängslats under en lång tid utav år. Det här är en fredlig organisation som samlat tusentals människor Nyligen så presenterade en tribunal i London som ägde rum tidigare i år ett enhälligt dokument där man visade på hur Kina under lång tid använt sig av samvetsfångar för illegal handel med mänskliga organ. Och jag har följt den här frågan under ganska många år och jag tycker att det finns väldigt tydliga belägg för att det här är på det sättet. Det finns forskningsrapporter, det finns vittnesmål, det finns medicinska experter, människorättsaktivister, advokater som visar på att det pågår en illegal handel med mänskliga organ i Kina. Och när jag då frågar representanter för den kinesiska regimen om detta så tillbakavisar man allt det här och säger att vi följer alla lagar. Men verkligheten visar någonting annat. Och om det nu är så att Kina verkligen följer internationell rätt när det gäller handel med mänskliga organ, då borde det ju inte vara några problem för dem att ta emot en internationell oberoende kommitté som skulle kunna undersöka de här anklagelserna. Men det tror jag inte man är särskilt intresserad av.